Hey, in this lecture, we're going to discuss value. I'm not talking about the monetary value here. This kind of value is the light and shade of your image. We're going to look at using black and white to adjust your color value. We're going to have a quick look at color systems. A look at the traditional color wheel, and we're going to look at color harmony. So let's start by looking at value. Value is the lightness or the darkness of a color, any color. It can be changed by adding either black or white to the color. Denman Ross, an American artist and scholar of art history, created a value scale which is still used today, and it goes like this. These terms are used by artists, and when they say things like use a high dark or a high light value, it's this chart they're referring to. Just as a side note, you will rarely see pure black or pure white used in a painting. Let's take a look at what effect value has on pure color. First, red. All I'm doing here is adding a color layer in Photoshop over the gray and painting the pure color on top of that into the color layer, in this case red. You can see pure red has a fairly low color value. Red is interesting because red actually changes color and turns into pink the more white you add, whereas other colors are mostly lighter variations of themselves. So if you wanted to use pure red in your art, it would have to be a very low tonal value. Pure yellow, on the other hand, has a high color value, up nearer to white. Blue is also an interesting color. It looks a much brighter color than it actually is, sitting just above black. I did a much higher resolution of the blue scale so you can see how close it gets to black before it plunges quite rapidly into the darkness. Blue is often used in shadows too, and you can see why. It has a very low color value. And then we have pure green sitting happily just above the mid-value range. Blue is unchanged by black until it gets into the low dark zone, whereas yellow begins to descend into black very early, up in the high light zone, which is really interesting actually. You can add value to any color, of course. Here are some of the secondary and intermediate colors with added value. You can see from this how important value is because it delivers the light and shade to your work. Later, you'll see me create thumbnails using a grayscale value basically, instead of painting directly in color. So we'll come back to value in more detail then. So let's move on to color. You might think we've just been talking about color, but we actually haven't. We've been talking about value and how value changes the color. Getting the color right in your art and being able to use them harmoniously is probably going to be your biggest challenge. I know it was for me. But once you get it and learn how to use it, you will create awesome results. Many artists struggle with color. I still do on occasion. So don't be put off if you can't get it right the first 30 times you try. You got to keep practicing. I mean, this was one of the hardest lectures to put together in this course, and I'm sure there will be some people out there that disagree with some of the things I'm saying here, but I'm going down a more traditional path with regard to colour. It's what I was taught, it has served me well, so that's what I'm going to use here. So that brings me on to systems. Now, I just need to clarify a few things. There are various systems out there, especially since the advent of technology. A few new systems have been invented. For example, CMYK, RGB, subtractive and additive. What does it all mean? Well, CMYK was invented for the printing industries and stands for cyan, magenta and yellow as the primary colours, and the K is for key, which I believe is what they use to key all colours together. But don't quote me on that, I'm not a printing expert. RGB is obviously red, green and blue and used on electronic devices. RGB colours are additive colours, and to mix them, light is added to the colour and they get brighter. This doesn't happen with a subtractive system. Using an additive system, you can't make red, green or blue using any mix of colour. They are the primary colours that all other colours are made from. Take yellow, for example. You get yellow by mixing pure red with pure green in RGB. And you can see this in your art package. But in RYB, red, yellow, blue, this is subtractive, i.e. the colour darkens when colours are mixed. Yellow is a primary colour. So traditionally, before technology was invented, we used the subtracted method to mix paints, and we still do. RYB as primary colours is what you are taught in school, and it's what you use if you use paints. Ultimately, once the paints are mixed, whether they are subtractive or additive, colours are still colours. Yellow is yellow, and you still use it the same way in an artistic context. So I'm going to be talking about the subtractive colour wheel, as this system is used by painters and it's more in tune with the painting process. Using colours harmoniously in your art is still the same, no matter how you mix them up. Technology is just a canvas at the end of the day. Let's start by identifying the colours on the wheel using the subtractive colour system. This is it, but each of these colours perform a very specific role. These are primary colours, yellow, red and blue. These colours are the base of every other colour. They are pure. Using paint, you cannot make these colours, and every other colour, when combined with value, can be made from these. These are your secondary colours, green, orange and violet. These colours are created by mixing two primary colours and sits between the corresponding mix, as seen here. Okay, so now, again, I don't want to confuse you, but the next set of colours is where more contention arises on what they should actually be called. Some call them intermediate colours, others refer to them as tertiary colours. If you search the internet, you'll find various arguments for both. I was taught that they are intermediate colours, which makes a lot more sense to me, and I'll explain why. The word intermediate means come in between two things. So in my mind, intermediate makes sense. These are intermediate colours. They come between a primary and a secondary colour, two colours, and their name always starts with the nearest primary colour followed by the secondary colour it sits next to. So that's how I remember them being intermediate colours. They sit between two other types of colour. The meaning of the word tertiary relates to the third in order of level, so you can see why intermediate colours have got people arguing about the name being the third set of colours on the wheel after primary and secondary. It kind of makes sense too. However, I learned that a tertiary colour is any mix of the three primary colours. These colours, for example, are the murky greys and browns that are created when you mix all the primary colours together in no particular balance. So for me, the three primary colour mix makes more sense in my head to be called tertiary colours. But listen, you can decide what you want to call them. Provided you understand what they are, it doesn't really matter. For clarity, these are the terms I will be using. Primary colours, secondary colours, intermediate colours, and tertiary colours for the murky ones. Now you know what the colours are called. Let's take a look how you can use colour in your art. There are many colour combinations you can use from the colour wheel to help you choose your palettes. So the first is complementary colours. This is the one that is probably heard the most. What does this mean? Well, if you take a look at your colour wheel, a complementary colour scheme are two colours that sit opposite each other on the colour wheel. Like this one, for example. Red and green sit opposite each other on the colour wheel and are considered complementary colours. Think about it, these are seen in nature a lot, like apples, for example, and many red berries grow on green trees or bushes, so we're familiar with seeing this combination. But of course, you need to add value to these colours to build light and shade, like this, and you can push these values as far as you want or need to. Another set is this, We'll be using this complementary colour scheme later when we start the actual colouring of our concept art. So you'll see me create this and see it in action. So look forward to that. These complementary pairs on the colour wheel have a special relationship. When they are placed next to each other, they make each other appear more intense and brighter. This is a phenomenon in colour theory called simultaneous contrast. But again, I don't want to start throwing more terminology at you. Just remember, opposites on the colour wheel are complementary colours. Probably where the term opposites attract come from. Maybe. Just guessing. Okay, so the next is a monochromatic colour scheme. So this, basically, if you take one colour from the colour wheel and increased or decreased its value, that would be a monochromatic colour scheme. Here are two examples of that. Let's take orange, a secondary colour, and mix in some white and black. Look at the range of colours we can create just by adding black and white, and green too, and you can do this with any of the colours on the colour wheel to create a stunning effect. Here's a fine example by Vincent van Gogh, painted in monochrome, and a fine piece of art it is too. So next up is a triad colour scheme. This consists of three colours that are evenly spaced around the wheel. Pick your first colour from the wheel, then select every fourth colour. Generally, one colour is the main colour of your painting and the other two are accents, so you have to carefully balance them. This scheme is quite popular because it gives you a lot of variation in colour. You can mix them and add or subtract value too, so you can see it has a lot of variation. But be careful of your colours. They'll appear very muddy if you overdo it, so caution is required. I'm going to quickly run through a couple more schemes, but I don't want to overwhelm you at this stage. Maybe try out a few that I've already mentioned above, and once you understand them, move on and experiment with the other schemes. But remember, we're going to be using a complementary scheme later anyway, so you'll see how it works. So next is the split complementary colour scheme. This is a variation on the complementary scheme. It uses a base colour and then two additional colours adjacent to what would be the complementary colour. And the next one is analogous. This is three colours that sit next to each other on the colour wheel. We see this a lot in nature too, and consequently is pleasing to the eye. So basically, to sum up, I'll leave colour at that for now, but I'll come back to it once we start painting the concept. As a challenge, do a search on the internet and see what other colour schemes you can find. There are plenty more out there. To use them, you really have to get a grasp of colour. Basically, walk before you can run, so to speak. Another thing to note here is that artists rarely use all the colour schemes. Many just stick with one or two and experiment with the others when they get bored or want to try something different. So you don't have to use them all. They're just there to try out and experiment with. So that's pretty much it for the fundamentals section. We're going to conclude and go over what we have covered in this section in the next lecture. So I'll see you there.